First time I've ever thought off the top of my head.
You want to start? You ready to start?
Yeah, that's great.
Synchronous.
Are you ready?
I got you. Okay. Welcome to the Nuclear Engineering Department Colloquium Series. Today we have our own Dr. Pevey and his daughter. Dr. Pevey graduated from here some years ago. He worked 15 years at Savannah River, and he's one of the world's experts in several things. He agrees.
Very important thing, right?
Okay. He plays basketball very well, for one thing. He's on the departmental basketball team, and without him, we would never win a game. He is our criticality safety king, and he's also our radiation transport king. But most of all, he's a travel expert. He's been traveling around the world with his daughter, and I will introduce you to Dr. Pevey.
Thank you very much, Larry. I did take just a note of sarcasm there, but this is an off week, so I appreciate people, as many people coming as came. Lee asked me when I went to Singapore, we were there, thanks for a conference on Monte Carlo. Lee asked me to take some pictures and come back and give a talk. I found out that I took too many pictures of some things and not enough pictures of others. But what Sarah and I were able to do, Sarah went with me, my daughter, Sarah, who is a sophomore in international business here at the University of Tennessee. Actually, I'm aware of the fact that there is no Department of International Business here at the University of Tennessee. But that's what she tells me. And it gets her to go on trip. An international business student ought to go international. So Sarah went along with me, got out of her class, and we took a bunch of pictures. So basically, I entitled the talk Technical and Cultural Experiences in Singapore. Sarah, go ahead and stand up. This is my daughter, Sarah. I put it down as co-authorship. The original thought was that I was going to give a talk and Sarah was going to add color. But the more we talked about it, I realized she had more color than I had. So I'm going to start the presentation and end it. I said technical and cultural experiences. The technical will sort of be light, and at the end, I'll talk a little bit about the conference. I'll break down what the conference was about, and go into maybe a technical point or two, depending on how much energy we all have at the end for Monte Carlo theory. And I thought I would start it off too with the geography and all, and then for the most part, I'm going to let Sarah take over and do most of the slides. But I'll go ahead and get started. You can stay here to add. You can stand there if you want to. We've never done this before, so it's going to be a tag team. And we'll have to see how this goes. Okay, let me tell you, I always have to organize my talks. We'll go to talk a little bit about the geography, getting there, and where Singapore is, and sort of how it's laid out. And then the three middle ones are really just series of photographs that we took, and so we will argue about where we were when we took it and what we did. And around the city itself, there's an island resort that's just off the southern tip of the island of Singapore. We went over there, so I gave that a separate category. And then there was an Indonesian side trip that we took, a ferry we took to one of the Indonesian islands that was close by. And then I'll finish with a technical overview of the conference. I didn't say that when I mentioned that I was starting to be the main author with Sarah adding color, and we reversed that. Part of the reason that we reversed that is because after the notice went out of this seminar, I got a number of emails of people who said they were going to sign on because Sarah was talking. I got no emails that said they were going to sign on because I was talking. So I realized that that's where the popular sentiment lies. So I'm going to let Sarah do most of it. In the geography, I wanted to show you where we were. Before I actually went to Singapore, I myself was not that familiar with where Singapore was. But Singapore is at the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula. It is an island. I'll get a close-up of it next. At the southern tip. This particular map does not show the equator, but the equator is right under Singapore. Singapore's latitude is like +1. Something that's right there, smack on the equator. So being there in late November practically has no season. Okay, and what seasons it has is sort of like 2 summers and 2 springs. That's usually 2 early summers and 2 late summers, because the sun passes twice in a year, coming and going. But it was a long trip. One of my goals in this lecture is to give you an idea of what it would be like to go to Singapore with us. And if I really wanted to do that, we'd start off by pulling your legs up to your chest, putting your chin on your knees, and watching Gone with the Wind 8 times in a row. Because that's what it took to get there. 24 hours from Knoxville. I say geography. What happened? Okay. I say geography because we went from here to Chicago, and then from Chicago to Singapore on the equator. That doesn't seem logical. But Chicago is actually closer to Singapore than we are. Chicago really is on the way to Singapore, which is sort of strange. You have to get a globe out and play the games to see how the great circles work. We flew for 21 hours to Tokyo. We were not on a plane that could go all the way in one swoop. So we went to Tokyo, getting there about sundown. It's very strange to leave on, what day was it? Like Saturday morning, and then we get to Tokyo on Sunday night, but the sun has not gone down.
Yeah.
You know, the sun has been up for 21 hours. It's very strange. So you have to pull down the shades to get any sleep in what your body thinks is night. Then when we got to Tokyo, and we took off from Tokyo for Singapore, I thought, well, now's the short part of the trip. But what was still in front of us was like a cross-country trip, 4,000 miles. Still left to go from Tokyo on down to Singapore. So Singapore is a long way from here. In fact, when we were getting the travel plans, I thought we might go the other way. Singapore is so close to being exactly on the other side of the earth that it's almost as close to go the other way, fly over Europe. It turns out you almost can't do that. You can't. I could fly over Europe and come back over Europe. What I wanted to do is fly west and keep going west. You know, come around the world. They won't let you do that. The airline won't let you do that. We would have to pay $3,000 more or something to do that. Okay, so there's Singapore. It sits on the bottom of the Malay Peninsula. Before I lose this, the history of Singapore is such that when everybody looks toward the land, Singapore is way off in the corner. It's like it had the impact that Miami had on colonial America. It's like nothing. It's way off on the edge. But it turns out that once the Suez Canal, but I don't have a big enough map here. Before the Suez Canal, ocean traffic did not come by Singapore. But once the Suez Canal was built, much shipping came down this strait of, what is it called? Strait of Malacca. Strait of Malacca thing. And so Singapore became a very important place. In fact, Singapore was founded by the British. The British went there to stop the Dutch expansion north, or something like that. So to keep the Dutch from coming up north. Okay, let's proceed. Here is Singapore itself. Now I have jumped to suddenly a very small scale. We say Singapore is an island, but if you'll see, it's an island like Hilton Head is an island. There's a very thin water separation from the mainland. So it's hard from a global view. It looks like it's just the tip of the Malay Peninsula, but it actually is an island. But you don't have to go on a long cruise to get to the mainland. It's just across a bridge, and you're at the mainland of Malaysia. Singapore is, the scale that we have here is 150 square miles. So it's about 24 miles across and about 12 miles up and down. So it's a very small island, but it forms the Republic of Singapore all by itself. And I will throw this slide in from time to time as we talk about where we go. The red is, I think it's a subway system. That's where I stole this map. It looks right.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's sort of like, it might be highways.
Who knows?
Okay. But anyway, as you can see, the streets mainly in this area here, if I get the pointer, this area here, if I got it right, is where we were. The National University of Singapore is down in this area. And the main business district is down here. We'll talk about various areas. You can see the Sentosa Island, which we'll talk about later, is there off the little triangular island that just barely shows in this. Okay, it's almost your turn. I want to throw in some quick facts. The area, as I said, is about 150 square miles. The population is about 4 million, and it is there are three main, the biggest population parts are Chinese is 76%, are ethnic Chinese, Malay 15%, Indian are 7%, and 3% is other, which includes Western and other ethnic groups from Asia. It's a very interesting mix of people, which determines a lot of what you see in it. For example, when I say English plus, they said in the schools, we talked to some of the local people, and in the schools, everybody has to learn English. Almost nobody speaks English at home, but everybody speaks English at school. So no matter what your language is at home, the students all speak English at school, and they have 4 other languages. So they said something like there's 4 official languages, 5 official languages, or something. But English is the one that they use in the school.
And one point is that they, when they say they speak English, they don't mean it in a real way. They come up with their own kind of dialect of English that they use among themselves. And some people you just can't understand them. And some people you'll speak to them in English, and I think that if you would write it down, they would understand you, but they just have no idea what you're saying because it's just the different accents. So.
Yeah, the first couple of days I thought the taxi drivers were joking when they referred to Singlish. But I thought they meant English with a bad accent. But no, it's an actual Creole language. I mean, it's a mix of Chinese and all this that they actually speak among themselves. But they try to speak what they call the Queen's English in public.
It took me about a week to figure out they were talking, when they said Q, they were talking about making lines. They call lines.
Yeah, sort of British stuff. They were actually a British colony from about 1826, 1820s, when Raffles, the guy who arrived there and set it up as a colony of Britain, and really until, they were very disturbed in World War II, and after World War II they really didn't get settled very much. After World War II they were still a colony, but that was in the days of, I was trying to learn geography in the 60s, and the map was changing every year, and they actually went for independence in the early 60s. The Brits wouldn't let them they didn't think that Singapore by itself was ready for independence, so they made them part of Malaysia, which was a newly forming country, and but that didn't work out. And so 2 years later, the Republic of Singapore went independent. The original prime minister was a guy named Lee Kuan Yew, and having been to Singapore, I'm surprised that Lee Kuan Yew is not better known in the world. We had studied him a little in business classes that I took, what the revolution that he did in Singapore. We'll be talking about that a little bit. He was prime minister until he didn't want to be prime minister anymore. And now the last 5 years, he's been something called a senior minister or something, which means he's the head of the party, and there is practically only one party, the People's Action Party in Singapore. They used to have all of the delegates in Parliament, and now they're at their low point, which is like 85%, or something like that. But still, it's practically a one-party place. So that's the overview of it. What he did, I'll give you just a little hint about what he did as far as the economy of Singapore. When he took it over in '63, reports from the Times say that it was a very dirty place and the poverty was everywhere, and he decided that was going to be cleaned up. Most people, when I tell them I went to Singapore, they remember the kid who was caned a few years ago for vandalizing a car. Remember that? We all hear about can't smoke. The drug laws are very strict there, and that you're not allowed to chew gum in Singapore and other things like that. And it's all true. He decided right away that this place was going to clean up, and he succeeded admirably. The place looks like Hilton Head. It's just a very clean place to live. The other thing that he did for the people, this was laid out by one of our bus drivers. He said that from the beginning, he required everyone's paycheck, they withheld, he gave us the figures, I didn't write them down, it's sort of like they withheld 35%, of which 15% is taxes, and 20% is forced savings. So people were forced to save like 20% of their income, and the guy said that you are paid I may be getting the decimal points off a bit, but when that part of your paycheck that goes in draws interest at a rate of 2.6% per year. When you have enough for a down payment on a place, which is usually a condo, you pay the down payment and the government lends you the rest of the money for purchase price at 2.7%. So there's a 10% difference. And so now almost everyone has their own place, and the island is covered with high-rise condominium kinds of places. And, Sarah, you heard more about that. Sarah interacted more with some of those locals. Oh, okay. I'm gonna turn it over to you now.
These are your pictures of the port.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's right. The first few pictures just sort of have a general view of how the city looks. This is a picture of the port. That's sort of like looking toward that lower left-hand corner port area. I was very impressed with the port itself. You can just barely see it, but off in the distance, if you can see it clearly enough, you have lots of ships that harbor. I've never lived at a deep water port like this, but huge ocean-going vessels are moored out in the bay practically all the time. I don't know what they're doing. Have they already unloaded? Are they waiting to unload? I don't know, but it's a very busy port. Lots of cranes around for loading and unloading. This is my daughter, Sarah.
Hi.
What's strange about these pictures is that I show up on them. I don't show up in 1/10% of the family pictures because I'm always the guy taking the pictures. Some of these pictures are Sarah's. This was taken from Mount Faber, which is a mountain in Singapore. Yeah, right. I think it is 800 feet. It's the height of this thing. But anyway, and looking back toward the city. This was actually part of a huge panorama picture, but I couldn't get it all up there. But to give you an idea, that it is high-rise. The buildings are not as tall as New York City's buildings. Here was the main port area where the Singapore River empties. That was real strange to me that they'd have a Singapore River. I never did go down to try to figure out. The place is so small, I don't see how a river could get going. I'm from Mississippi, and rivers are things that are thousands of miles long. I don't know how a river could get going on such a small island. But it's a fairly good-sized river, and it served as where the river went into the ocean is where the original port was built up. Hey, now I'm turning it over to Sarah.
All right. Let's go, guys.
But I will continue to add editorial comments.
Another thing about the airport is that when we came in, there was actually a sign that said something to the effect of "No hippies allowed." So, and they had the right to not let you in if you looked like a hippie. So I don't even know what that meant. I was all worried. I was in Bergenstock. Didn't know what was going on. All right, this is our hotel, the Orchard Parade Hotel. It's a very interesting little section, the Orchard Road. Right, basically what it is the biggest shopping center you have ever seen in your life. I was in heaven. It was great. I'm pretty sure the next slide. Okay, this is the view from our rooms. And as you can see, it's just like perfect weather. You have to remember I was coming in the middle of Thanksgiving, so it was just like all of a sudden it was the middle of summer. And this is like the little paradise that we had like right outside our window. I work at Starbucks Coffee. There was one in the lobby, and I got all excited. And actually, I met a girl there who I talked to, and we actually ended up going to dinner at the Hard Rock Cafe. And my coworkers all make fun of me. They said you went to a foreign country and you hung out at Starbucks, and it was interesting. And another thing is that Starbucks is everywhere. It's like every half block is another Starbucks. But there was another one that you could see from this Starbucks. Like I said, very metropolitan. This is just a shot of Orchard Street. You can sort of see that. See, one thing you notice is that it's very clean. I mean, there are leaves and stuff down there, but you know, they say that if there's potholes, that it's gone within 20 minutes. As soon as it gets called in, somebody comes down there ASAP to take care of it.
We talked to a taxi driver. You would see policemen every so often, and I made a comment to the taxi driver that, you know, it makes you feel safe to see so many policemen. He said you saw 10% of the police. The 90% of them are plain clothes. It's kind of scary. You know, it's nice to be a visitor, but I don't know. Okay.
And you know, another interesting thing that happened was that we were walking somewhere, and we were behind a family, right, a father, a mother, and a little kid, and the father leaned over in the bushes and spit, right, just spit in the bushes. And there is a law that says there's no spitting in Singapore. And I turned to Dad, I'm like, did he just spit, you know? And the guy turned around, and he was afraid, because I think it was because he thought that we were plainclothes policemen, until he turned around and saw that we were obviously not Singaporean. It was very concerning, I think. But the thing is you really don't feel like you're in as much of a police state as you are. Like, you don't see. That's one reason why the policemen are all plainclothes, because they said that Europeans would get nervous seeing so many policemen around. So they're all in plainclothes. Okay, this is the biggest mall in Singapore, and this was probably about a block and a half from my hotel. Very exciting. I think we have more pictures.
Yeah, there were 3 malls. The way we'd walk out of there were 3 malls within a couple of blocks in the stretch. And we found out our last couple of days that there were 2 malls the other way. We had never even gone the other way.
Okay, so this is one thing that they did. Right around Thanksgiving, right? So everybody's starting their Christmas decorations. Well, this is the mall decorated with a huge Christmas tree, and they're trying to be like America as far as malls go. As far as you know, as much as I can tell, they're trying to be very European American. And it's very interesting that it was, you know, you walk in, you're soaked in sweat. It's like 98, 100 degrees outside with humidity, and you come in here and it's beginning to feel a lot like Christmas, and all the famous Christmas songs make you feel like you're cold. And but this is Christmas. That was the theme of the mall. So I think they were trying not to incorporate anything religious into it. I don't know, though. This is our tour guide. This is all in chronological order, so that was just an overview of where we were. And this is our tour guide in the lovely Singapore orchid shirt. And you want to...
Yeah, the other 2 people that you could see, the lady in the denim and the man who is facing to the left on the right-hand side, the man is Jerry Spanier. Jerry is one of the Monte Carlo experts in the nuclear field. He and Eli Gelbart wrote the book, literally, on Monte Carlo methods in the 60s. And it turns out, I'll say later, Jerry really is the only anchor that I have at this conference. It's full of mathematicians and Jerry and me. But Jerry translates for me. And I'd been at a conference before with Jerry. That's his wife. The lady is his wife, Bunny. They ended up being on this tour with us, so that added to it as well. I had seen Jerry at meetings before, but it helped to have Sarah along. They took Sarah under their wing. And they would accept me because Sarah was there. But this is, I think we have a couple more pictures of Jerry. Get another picture.
Yeah.
This is the tour guide guy, is the guy that was telling me about life there in Singapore.
This is a shot of Little India, I believe.
Yeah, right.
Right. This is the very first place we went. And this is actually the only picture we have of Little India. Oh, look. I'm there on the bottom.
Gilroy was the
Dad was taking that picture. It's kind of obvious now. This is the only picture we have of Little India. And as soon as we got off the bus, we walked into this cafeteria kind of place. And one of the things he was trying to show us is how different culturally all the different areas are. And when you walked in, all you could smell was curry. It made you hungry just walking in. Yeah,
the city was divided. What the British did was they let each of the different ethnic groups have their area of the city. So they have Chinatown. It's sort of strange to have a Chinatown that close to China. We're used to it like in New York City. There's Chinatown, and there's a Little India, and there's an Arab district, and then there's the western areas.
This is us in Raffletown. That is a snake of some sort, probably a boa constrictor, I don't really know. It seemed like a good idea at the time. And that's all I can say. He maybe put the hat on and a little vest, and I think he tried to get more money for something, I can't remember. It was a wonderful little tourist trap, what can I say? All right, and this is actually in Chinatown, but it is
it's an Indian temple.
Yeah. It's a Hindu temple in the middle of Chinatown. And that's one thing that's interesting, is that even though there are even though there are specific districts for specific different kinds of cultures, there are things like this, because this was here before it was named officially Chinatown. So, and it doesn't seem to cause much of a problem. This is Dad taking off his shoes before he goes in, and Coca-Cola, which is everywhere, as is apparent. This is us standing inside then.
And my socks.
And his socks. This is you can see the little baby over here, sort of christening of some sort. I don't know much about it, but it was really interesting to watch. And this is
it was just very interesting. Obviously what happened is this is a working temple, or whatever you say. I mean, there were ceremonies going on. This with the young baby and a marriage going on while tourists are coming and going. So it was very nice to be able to see it.
And they didn't seem to mind us taking pictures, because these people obviously saw it. They're looking right at me. Who are these people taking pictures? I don't know them. So.
This is a wedding party.
Yes, this is a wedding party. They were walking around. There's the center area, and then there's sort of a courtyard area that goes around it, and they were walking around the little courtyard to go back. Okay, this is me in front of the jewelry factory, and you might want to talk about it.
Oh, well, it's just a place where they made jewelry. They would make them into rings, get the jewelry coming in, and then they would make it into rings and necklaces or whatever. So Christmas coming up, I had to do a little shopping there.
We dropped a lot of money here, so that's why I was there. Okay, this is the National Orchid Garden of Singapore, and this is one of the few places where you can actually have an outside orchid garden because of the temperature. Right? I mean, it's always humid summer, so it's the perfect temperature for these. And even, I mean, when you walk in, this is probably the most humid hot place that I was at, because they have to keep it so humid even inside. So here's me, pretty flowers. The national flower of Singapore, the Vanda Joachim. This is an explanation of it. Then this is their national flower. Sitting right next to the sign. Okay. And here we are again with the tour guide and
the Spaniard.
I just like that picture. Okay, and this after we took the tour, like the first day we got there. Actually, the first night we came in at night, and so the first day we went on the tour. And here we are the next day when we're just walking around the city. And this is just a couple of buildings in Chinatown. And this is
a Buddhist temple.
Right. Okay.
In Chinatown.
We didn't go in.
What?
Didn't we?
I think that's the one that we go the next few pictures.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's the one. That's the one we were talking about. Yeah, we went in there and we were gonna we bought souvenirs. And one of the funny things is that we were. Every other place in Singapore you had to haggle, right, if you wanted something. And we got there and we wanted to buy fans. So Dad starts, the seller quotes the price, and Dad says, "Well, will you accept so much lower?" He starts laughing. He's like, "No, you don't understand. This goes to the temple. This is
you feel bad God or something. Yeah, just laugh. Yeah, right.
Don't haggle with deities." I think here's another shot. This is Dad walking up a street.
Yeah.
This is me. I'm over here.
I included those two pictures together because there's one picture of me walking down the street, split back to it, and then there's one picture of Sarah walking down the street. You'll notice there's a big difference, and that is that I look down and she was up. So the bottom line is, when we were together, I was the guy with the map because I'm the guy that I understand Cartesian geometry, right? And so Sarah, I said, I'm the guy in charge here. We were walking around trying to get downtown, and I had my nose in a book with a map, and I was looking at the street names, and I said, we go this way, and we'll walk along. And Sarah said, Dad, shouldn't we be going toward the big buildings? What?
Yeah, see, I lived in the mountains for a summer, so you learn that if you're going to the mountains, you drive toward those big rocks. And if you're trying to get to a subway stop in the financial district, the big buildings seem to be the way to go. This is the shopping experience. Okay, let's see. These are probably the creepiest mannequins I've ever seen. I don't know if you can see, but their mouths are open and they're just it's just incredibly creepy, and they're laughing mannequins. I bought a couple of robes over here for my sister and me, and over here, I don't know if you can see it, but they're hanging, what's it hanging?
Yeah, hand-painted mural kind of thing.
Yeah,
Whatever.
hand-painted mural. And so this is our picture, their shopping picture. Okay, this is where we went to dinner.
I'm wearing my nuclear engineering shirt.
Showing the nuclear pride, if you will.
So we were down by the river.
Mhm. Very good. And we were eating at a pizza place on the other side of the country. Pizza place. Yep. Another picture, me at the same restaurant. And now we get to Sentosa Island. Now, let's see what this is. Okay. Sentosa Island, as I said before, is way down there. Right, that little area. Sentosa Island has a very strange history. Up until recently, I don't know when recently is exactly, it was a fort, all right? And during
Go on, Max. Tell us.
Okay, well, why don't you explain?
Okay, it's an island off that southern tip. It was used by the British as a fort. They had big cannons, but its moment of truth, nobody ever made war on Singapore until the Japanese came in World War II, and they came from the mainland. They came down the Malay Peninsula and came across the causeway that way. Well, the Brits had their cannons all pointed out to sea, and it turned out that these cannons that they'd spent so much time making never got fired because they were pointing the wrong way. The Japanese took over the island. On Sentosa Island, they have probably the best thing about it is that they have a wax museum thing, and this was a part of their history that was very strange. The Japanese actually used this island as a POW camp, and they now made it into a theme park. And it's very strange.
It's very creepy once you realize what's happened there.
With the golf course, I mean, they have a golf course laid out, and in the history part they tell you that on the golf course that prisoners who had been thrown off the cliff to drown in the sea, their bodies washed up on this golf course. So it's very strange to have an old POW camp like that, torture place, made into a theme park. But that's the way it was. The only way you can get to it, there is a bridge across to it, but also they have cable cars that go across from this Mount Faber, which is the highest point in Singapore. So that's what we did. Is we did the touristy thing and went over to Mount Faber and got on the cable cars and rode the cable
cars. You did the cable cars.
Standing there in the middle, you see just to the right of this cable car, you see this thing that looks like a lion's head. That's the symbol of Singapore, which is a merlion, like a mermaid. It's a merlion. It's a head of a lion and the tail of a fish, and that is the symbol of the city, because they said that when it was founded, when Singapore was founded by a Malay prince, he saw a lion when he arrived, so he called it Singapura, which means lion, land of the lion.
Lion City.
Lion City, yeah, Lion City. Nowadays, nobody ever saw another lion. They don't think it really was a lion. It's probably a tiger of some sort. They said even by the early 1900s, tigers are still taking off 4 or 5 people a week. Tigers. But anyway, that's their symbol. Took the cable car over.
That's me and the merlion. Sorry about the background. We had to get the full glory of the merlion and my foot and everything.
With their little foot out.
All right, this is Sentosa Island, and as you look, you can see what we're talking about how it's Disney World. I mean, this could very easily be. It's very weird. It's very, very.
You see the dragon coming out with the Sentosa Island in his left claw. You see across the sidewalk, you see his tail comes out of the ground and goes back in. And finally, across the road, we couldn't get it in the picture, his tail finally comes out of this huge statue. It really isn't under the ground. They have. And they said they were very careful about this. The guy said they were very careful about the way the dragon, the direction it pointed in and all of that.
All right, this is me and the guy in the wax museum. Yes, it was really interesting. They actually had a lot more places where you could go in and be a coolie in Singapore, but I neglected to do that.
Yeah, they had a lot of wax. I mean, it was a whole building. This is the only shot we got from it. But we spent an hour there easily, and we were rushing through it. Just scenes of Singapore in life.
Because we thought we had to catch up to the tour. We really should have spent more time there. I mean, that was really the only thing we couldn't see in the States. One thing is, another thing how we talked about the golf course, what makes it extra creepy is not only is that where the body's washed up, but there's this big thing about how one particular officer sat all evening or all afternoon and buried like 25 bodies. So not only is it where they washed up, this is where they're all buried, and it's Harnine. Alright, this is the Butterfly Museum on Sentosa Island, one of the many tourist attractions. So we have pretty pictures of butterflies. Butterflies. There's some more.
We have hundreds of pictures of butterflies.
We have lots of butterflies.
Butterflies don't cooperate when you try to take their pictures. So I guess
You should see us just riding around this place going, oh, stay down.
you look at them later and you say, I don't see the butterfly in these pictures.
It's the beauty of digital camera, though. We didn't have to pay anything for the pictures and fuzzy butterflies. This is durian.
A durian.
A durian.
Have you ever heard of a durian plant?
A durian? Okay.
Well, never mind.
Okay. A durian plant is, it's obviously not this big. It's about the size of a melon, and it is supposed to be the most disgusting smelling fruit on the face of the planet. And it's actually quite a delicacy in Singapore, but they'll have signs that say no durian, no durians allowed, because they just smell so bad. I mean, there's actually a durian.com. Durian.com. It's
never mind. We never got the courage to actually eat it.
No, we didn't. We actually thought we found some, and it turns out they were just plastic because nobody would sell them on the streets. This is one of the aquarium, and I am petting a starfish. And shark. Seahorses. Jellyfish. I love jellyfish. This is really interesting. The reason I was so shocked is because this is right when I realized that these embryos are actually alive. And these are like pulsating real shark embryos. And a turtle. The turtle's up by. Sorry, there are a lot of girly pictures in this. Okay, this is us. There was a little tube with the.
What do you call it? They have one. Do they have one in Chattanooga, or even here in the outlet? Yeah, where you walking under the tank. So I got a shark coming after my daughter.
Okay, and this is the resort that's on Sentosa Island.
We didn't stay there. We just went there to look at it.
And we ate a very expensive buffet lunch there before we realized what the price was. Here's one of the pools. There's scenic palm trees. And this is one of the beaches. These islands are really neat. It really made you feel like you were in the South Pacific, just like in the movies. All the desolate islands. This is going to be our trip to Indonesia. We decided to do it so that we could first off go to another country, second off get our passports stamped because we want to have impressive passports. Okay, now did you know? Yeah,
of course, Singapore is its own city and it's there. So Malaysia, the Malay Peninsula is Malaysia above it, and I don't exactly know the political affiliation of all the little islands. But just to the right, you get into Indonesia. The Indonesia islands actually come right up to Singapore. The one we went to would be we did not get below the equator. I was hoping we would, so I'd cross the equator, but I never have. It was about 45 minutes ferry ride. And so what would that make it, probably 20 miles offshore, something like that. You were in the Indonesian islands. So that's probably to the right of where it says Singapore, maybe above the end, or something like that is about where we were.
This is us on the little ferry.
Yeah, when I say a ferry, I would have thought it was like those old movies, New England, where you drive onto it and all this. But this ferry was like a jet. I mean, we had a terminal just like when you go down to the airport. And then you had a ticket, and you had a seat, and you sat on these, it wasn't a jet boat, but it was I can't remember exactly. But, you were in a cabin with TV going and all this stuff.
Alright, and this is a picture, the jet flight, that is ours. Well, that's sort of what the boat.
Yeah, that was one of the things.
Yeah, and this is a Singapore one, because you can see the cable cars right above it. So this is a Singapore port, or the little terminal. This is a shot from that same resort as we went by it on the water. And this is just a shot of the city. And that's a little island that we're looking at right there. And that's one of the cargo carriers.
Yeah, I took that picture because I'm such a nerd. I mean, we passed this boat and the sea going, and you see what it is. You see the height of that thing. About half of it is a boat, and the top half of it is just these railroad cars, I guess, stacked up. I always thought they'd fall off or something. It's very strange they're stacked up that high.
That's why those Nike sneakers were washing up on the West Coast.
This is Eddie and me. That's Eddie. When we walked out of the terminal in Indonesia, we were just mobbed by just probably about 50.
Yeah, you guys wanted to take us around taxis.
None of them could speak English. Except, so we sort of tried to figure out which one could.
Who speaks the best English? Discuss that. We'll cut right to it, right, Art? Beat around the bush.
Yeah.
That would be me. Okay.
Which skills is a test, yeah. And this is Eddie.
That's the car behind him.
Yeah, that's the car behind him. And you can see, I mean, just think about, look at the scene behind us. You see, this is their metropolitan area. This is their shopping center. There were like 3 shopping centers on this little island. These are their shopping centers. It was just a culture shock going from one to the other. This is me in that shopping center that's behind us with a whole bunch of handmade masks.
Yeah, we bought one of those masks. I wanted a picture.
Yeah, we wanted to get the little girl in the picture, but she wouldn't come. This is us driving. We got there and we told Eddie we wanted to take pictures, right? Pictures, city pictures. So he drove us around in his little Toyota Corolla for probably about 2 hours. Wouldn't he say? Yeah, because he got paid by the hour, and he ended up taking us. You'll see it later. This is the best picture spot. But this is one thing, is that he is driving on the left side of the road like they do everywhere else except for here, and driving on the right. And he's sitting on the right, driving on the left.
Yeah, and you see a lot of people be walking on the streets, a lot of people pass. Eddie honked the horn every 10 seconds, whether he had a reason to or not. I think he had to warn people that he was coming, especially whenever he'd come around a curve like this, he'd honk the horn. Going around the curve, I guess just to warn people who might be in the road, get out of the road.
And one thing about this, you see the person on the motorbike, the motorbike in front of us, they were everywhere, and they seemed to have absolutely no rules set to them, even in Singapore. I mean, we were sitting in traffic on the interstate, right, and little motorbikes were just zipping by us in the taxis, like in the middle of the, between the 2 lanes. It doesn't seem like they have any official rules. And then when we got into a traffic jam in Indonesia, and it was just a free-for-all. I mean, they were making up lanes, driving in sidewalks. This is the picturesque spot.
This is where Eddie took us. We wanted a picturesque spot, so this is where Eddie took us. Eddie didn't speak enough English for me to ask him exactly why he thought this was a picturesque spot to the island. But once we got there, I had to take some pictures, or else Eddie would be offended. So I took some pictures.
And this is us. We stopped in the middle of a bridge. Nobody seemed to care. And took a picture of a river. This is me in front of Eddie's car.
Yeah, this is a little resort that catered to Westerners, and this this little boat dock here was actually a way station. You could come from Singapore to this. You could buy a ticket that actually came up the river and landed at this place if your destination was this resort. So that was a boat sort of like the one that we've been on.
This is another picturesque spot. We stopped at a resort, but it turns out there was no way to get down to the beach. So we got a bunch of pictures of palm trees and rooftops.
The ocean in the distance.
And the ocean in the distance, right? Ocean.
Oh, yeah, we were going along, and he said, you want pictures? He said, do you gloss? Gloss. No, I don't gloss. We have gloss. It turned out he was saying golf. I said, do you play golf? He said, no, my boss plays golf. I don't play golf. I said, the same's true with me. Some things are true the world over.
Picture me in front of. Oh, this is another picture of the. More pictures. This. You see how she's looking at us like that, like we're crazy? That's because that's how she was looking at us. Eddie stopped to get water, and we thought,
Every time Eddie stopped the car, we were a little worried. We realized we weren't in Kansas anymore. And every time Eddie would stop, especially when he'd get to places where there were security guards, he'd get out of the car, and they'd come out with their guns. And I was wondering, now why did I bring my daughter to Indonesia? But everything always went well. She said it was kind of funny.
Yeah. And she tapped her on the shoulder and pointed at us for a while. I don't know what she said. Stupid Americans, probably. This is a sign, you sort of see. This is a picture. This is one interesting thing that struck me, is that you see how those people are standing around? That's all that they did. I mean, for the most part, you'd see a lot of people who are, my age, able-bodied, whatever, standing around and doing nothing. I thought that was really sad. Not in Singapore. That didn't happen in Singapore because, it just goes to show the differences between the jobs that were available in Singapore and whatever. Very interesting.
Okay. Now I'll take it back. Last few minutes I want to spend talking in order to make it worthwhile. I have a little bit of technical time now. I thought I'd talk about the conference itself. So not in great detail, but a little bit. This is the actual cover of the book that we were given. The conference was called Fifth International Conference on Monte Carlo and Quasi-Monte Carlo Methods in Scientific Computing. So it's called MCQMC, Monte Carlo and Quasi-Monte Carlo. It's in 2002. Here, sponsored here in the National University of Singapore. And here's their website. This is a little busy for anybody who holds, but this is the website of the group that holds it, MCQMC group. And you can see that this was the fifth in a series. They hold them every 2 years. The previous one had been in, this is the clip for this one in Singapore. It was chaired by Harold Niederreiter. Is that how you say it? Niederreiter? Who was actually, although he's Austrian, he has recently gone to Singapore to be at the National University. So he hosted it there. The previous one had been at Hong Kong. Previous one prior to that at Claremont College, which is where Jerry Spanier is from. That's in California. And the one before that was in Salzburg, and the first one was in Las Vegas, which is a wonderful place to hold the Monte Carlo Conference. So notice Harold Niederreiter has been involved in all of it from the start. He and Jerry and several other people in the field are really the driving force behind this. This is a picture of Harold Niederreiter giving a talk. I actually stole this one from Hong Kong. Pictures that I took there. Once again, this is a repeat, but I want to show Jerry Spanier again because he is really the nuclear connection to this Monte Carlo community. And I also wanted to show Carol Hayakawa, who is standing there with Harold Niederreiter. Carol was a student of Jerry's, who was given her doctoral thesis in 2000, I guess it was, in Hong Kong. And I really liked Carol because Carol talked about nuclear things. It was about the only papers I ever understood completely were the papers that Carol gave, because she was interested in medical planning and other kinds of uses of Monte Carlo for transport. I wanted to give you an overview of how the papers broke down to let you know what the papers were about. For the most part, in the beginning at least, it was mainly a group of mathematicians. And over the years, as we've gotten to the fifth conference, it's become more and more applications. You read down the list, you see that the first category, they are. There's lattice rules, experimental design, digital net, whatever. There's 33 papers there, which were about there were probably about 90 papers in the 80s papers. So half of them are still very mathematical as far as the development of random numbers are included in the digital nets and lattice rules and other things. There were 13 papers that I could not qualify because they were about mathematics that I didn't understand. I just lumped them into mathematical, involving things like existence proofs and that sort of stuff that I didn't even attend. They had a growing group on quantum computer algorithms, the idea of quantum computers. Have any of you worked with quantum computing? They had papers on algorithms that will be used on quantum computers. And somebody who is like me asked the question, what is a quantum computer? Are there any in existence? When will we have some? And it seemed like quantum computers were 20 or 30 years away, the way they talked, for useful work. Is that true? People talk about usable quantum algorithms, but then they got defensive and defended themselves. So when it comes along, we have to have done some research on algorithms to use the quantum computer. And then about a total of 37 involved applications, 37 programs. About a third of them in finance. We had a bunch of Wall Street guys there dealing with finance-type applications. 6 involved Boltzmann transport equation of various sorts, not all of them having to do with neutral particles like us. Other linear equations were 3, dynamics and control, a couple of papers. General papers on Bayesian and Markov processes and things like that, so 5 of those. And then some other things on physics of other kinds of physics applications, and a couple on graphics. So that gives you a feel for the overall flow for the papers. I was there mainly for the applications, and I wanted to get an idea about the mathematical basis of Monte Carlo. In fact, the title of the conference was Monte Carlo and Quasi-Monte Carlo. When I went to the first of these conferences, I had no idea what Quasi-Monte Carlo was. I teach a Monte Carlo course here. I'd never used the term Quasi-Monte Carlo. So I thought, to give us a little taste of what the conference was about, I would have a couple of slides just talking about what Quasi-Monte Carlo is. Most of us have had some sort of a Monte Carlo background that tells us, this is a graphic that I borrowed from my own course notes. The orange is distracting, but basically what this graph has to do is the middle third of it is just a typical black box. And throughout the course, I return to the fact that a Monte Carlo process is a black box that, like most black boxes, it has inputs and it has outputs. For the most part, a Monte Carlo process uses as input a stream of random numbers between 0 and 1. That is the basic raw material of a Monte Carlo process. And generating those numbers on a computer is a subspecialty to try to get something that looks random. Putting those random numbers in. Most of us who have done Monte Carlo work, we know how these random number generators look. What comes out of them are a random stream of numbers between 0 and 1. Should be no correlation between which number you're going to get next based on which number you got now. Although there is a mathematical correlation, it should not affect your answer. And they should, of course, jump all over the place from 0 and 1 in order to give you true random sampling. And then the box itself, of course, has got to be very, very carefully designed. In our Monte Carlo course here, the development of the black box is, of course, what the course is about, designing Monte Carlo processes. The output of the black box is guesses of some observable parameter. And so out from this black box, you kick it, and it takes in a few random numbers, and it kicks out a guess of whatever parameter you're trying to guess. Maybe the criticality of the system, maybe the response of the detector, some measurable. And that's the whole idea of a Monte Carlo process. Basically as I said, in my class, I'm mainly worried about the black box and the design of the black box. I pay some attention to what you do with the streams that come out because you have to analyze this stream and find their variance and other kinds of things so that you can quantify your answer in terms of we have an average or expected value with a plus or minus statistical error. The inputs are these random numbers, and I've never been much of a random number person. I don't get into the algorithms of generating these random numbers. I take them as given. Almost all languages have a subroutine you can call, a function that will kick back these stream of random numbers. But it turns out, when you say Monte Carlo, quasi-Monte Carlo, 3/5 of the words are quasi-Monte Carlo. The quasi-Monte Carlo is a rather new, or the last couple of decades, twist on Monte Carlo in that they replaced the random stream of incoming variables with a regular grid. Almost like what we used to do when we would do straight numerical methods with fixed differences, you know, a finite difference, finite element. What they do, instead of feeding it random numbers, they actually feed it regular numbers, like 0.01, 0.02, 0.03, 0.04, then you get up to 1. So instead of having a random coverage of the range between 0 and 1, they have a very regular coverage. Now, that seems like cheating. Now, the first thing that Monte Carlo thinks is what all Monte Carlo processes have in common is that they involve random processes. Well, if you take out the random number driver of this thing and put in a regular grid, then it is not Monte Carlo anymore. So basically, the word quasi ends up being the word not. It is not a Monte Carlo process because you're feeding it this regular stream. And as I said here, the quasi-Monte Carlo methods replace the incoming stream with a regular grid of points between 0 and 1. It has very interesting mathematical properties. One is that if you take random numbers, if you pull out 100 random numbers between 0 and 1, and you do another 100, it turns out that as you lay them out, if you were actually going to plot them on a grid between 0 and 1, somewhere on there'd be a maximum gap. You know, there's a gap left open. A regular grid of 100 numbers would regularly, 0.01, 0.02, 0.03. The largest gap would be 1 over n, right? If you have 100 numbers, 1 over n would be the largest gap. Turns out that if you take them actually randomly, you end up with these gaps that appear that are really on the order of 1 over the square root of n. Fairly large gap appear, and it turns out that those gaps really drive your error. One thing I learned in Monte Carlo before I ever heard of quasi-Monte Carlo, and most Monte Carlo analysts learn to live with, is that Monte Carlo has this 1 over the square root of n thing, meaning that if you take 100 samples and you get accuracy to the first decimal point, to get another decimal point, you have to take 100 times as many samples as you have taken thus far. To get the third decimal point, you have to take 10,000 times as many samples as you took before. A very slow convergence, 1 over the square root of n. It turns out that mathematically, that 1 over the square root of n problem that we have, that slow convergence, is due entirely to the fact that these random numbers are taken randomly, that they don't cover the space evenly, like quasi does. So that has been the basis of what has happened to quasi-Monte Carlo methods. For those of you who might be interested, finds out that not only do you have, if you go in and use quasi-Monte Carlo, there are some consequences of making that choice. One of which is that the efficiency strongly depends on the dimensionality of the problem. I said that the efficiency versus the 1 over square root of n, which we're used to dealing with in Monte Carlo analysis, actually turns out to be something that sort of is 1 over n. If we could really get 1 over n convergence, that would be tremendous. We generally run a million particles, a fairly small Monte Carlo problem. Take the square root of that, and you get accuracy on the order of 1,000. If we could get that from 1,000 instead of a million, that would save us a factor of 1,000 in the work, the amount of computational effort that it takes. We can't quite get 1 over n. We get a numerator. You can do mathematically prove that there's an upper bound limit on the efficiency that's the log of n to the d minus 1, where d is the dimensionality of the system. Dimensionality to a Monte Carlo guy does not mean like we do a 3-dimensional versus 2-dimensional kind of model of a reactor or something. What it means to a Monte Carlo guy is how many random numbers you use for each guess that you get. If we had a problem that involved integrating a single integral in 1 dimension, we would have a one-dimensional problem. We would pick a random number, we would get a guess of our answer. Pick another one, get a second guess. If we have a two-dimensional problem, we have to draw two random numbers to get one guess. And it turns out that the efficiency for the quasi-Monte Carlo type arrangements goes down with the dimensionality. That's one bad thing. The other thing is in parentheses, the problems that we're used to, one of the reasons we don't hear much about quasi-Monte Carlo in the nuclear business is that if you have a problem that involves any kind of particle scattering, your dimensionality is infinite. Because there is no upper limit on how many random numbers you would have to draw to follow a particle from its birth to its death. Because there's no upper limit on how many times that particle might scatter. Every time it scatters, you have to draw more random numbers to figure out what its new properties are. Another consequence is each decision must have its own random number generator. We're used to writing Monte Carlo problems. No matter how many random numbers that you need for the problem, you have a single generator that spits these things out, one after the other. And a truly random number generator it doesn't matter what you use, for which number you use for which decision, because they're uncorrelated with each other. But with when you get into quasi, where your random number stream covers a field like paint would cover a wall, you have to use every number for the same decision. So each decision has to have its own random number generator. This is the kind of thing that we talked about during the conference. They were talking about the generation of these and the use of these quasi-random numbers. They spent a lot of time talking about applications. In their applications, for the most part, they would compare whether their efficiency gain, how much gain they got from doing quasi-Monte Carlo over the traditional 1 over the square root of n. And also the individual random number generators must be independent of each other. I have a couple more slides, and we've run out of time, but I wanted to show you how these quasi-random numbers are actually generated. It's a very interesting algorithm, but I won't get into it now. It's a very, very clever way of getting a stream of numbers that continually go back over the range from 0 to 1, and very clever algorithms. I had a couple of slides of base 2 and base 3 of these sequences, but I've run out of time. What we end up with is a picture that Jerry Spanier took of Sarah and I at the banquet, and he mailed it to us afterwards. So it was nice to hear. See how happy we are. This is about the time they announced the next one was going to be in France.
Yes.
Sarah loves
Double
France.
trouble. I will be there.
Except her mother had said, no, you're not going to go to France. Okay, that's all I'm going to try to cover. Any questions? We had one question from Cyber World that came in. It was from a viewer by the name of Lee Dodds. I'll just read it to you. This is Lee Dodds, who is attending an international topical meeting in Gatlinburg, which is where Ron Pevey should have been yesterday. In any event, this is a question for Sarah Pevey. Okay, you ready, Sarah? On your trip to Singapore, did your dad do too much chaperoning of your activities?
Yes, as a matter of fact, he did.
That is, did you meet any interesting young men?
No. As a matter of fact, I didn't. I couldn't go to clubs. I couldn't go to the nightlife, and Dad wouldn't let me out of the block. You know, out of his sight for a block. Sorry, Dr. Dodds. No ring in. What can I say?
Okay, you have the question? Okay, that's all.
Okay. As all of you remember, there's supposed to be refreshments downstairs for all of us. There should be. Will be. Okay. Let's give Dr. Thanks very much.
Oh, well, thank you. We didn't want to misidentify any of the cultural stuff we were saying. Oh, really?